Bing. Okay, so welcome to our first week of content. Just so you know, at any time, you're always welcome to ask questions. So feel free just to type your question in the chat. If you have any comments, you're more than welcome just to type in the chat. And that kind of helps me as well. So I know you're listening and I know you're there, because sometimes I don't hear from anyone for like 20 minutes and I'm like, is anyone there? So feel free just to type in the chat as we go along if I do ask any questions as we go through the content, okay? So today, what we're going to be talking about is the warm-up. Okay, so just starting off, talking about the benefits, so physiological benefits and how we would like sequence a warm up. So the idea is today is that we're going to go through kind of how you would program a warm up and kind of the sequencing. And then in the lab is where you're going to be learning the exercises. And then you could just plug in exercises based on what we are talking about in class. Okay, so the idea with the lectures, we're going to learn more about the programming side of everything and a little bit of kind of background content. And then in the lab, you'll learn the actual exercises and then also how to cue a client through them as well. Okay. So today, by the end of class, you should be able to describe the positive impact of warm-up on performance. Okay, so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the different types of pre-exercise warm-up that you could include. We'll talk about dynamic warm-up exercises, what they are in general. In lab, we'll actually do some dynamic exercises. And then we'll talk about, what might you prescribe for one client versus another, and again, more generally. And then we'll talk about the current literature on including static stretching in the warm-up. Okay, so you might be thinking to yourself, wait, do we do static stretching in a warm-up? Can we do it? Can we not do it? And I think there's a lot of controversy and, you might have heard, no, don't ever do static stretching in a warm-up, or you might have heard, yeah, it's okay. So we'll look at the actual literature and see what it says at the end of class. And we'll also talk about self-myofascial release, what we did in the lab this week. We'll be talking about that as well. So we're going to start off just thinking about when you are creating a warm-up. So we're just focusing on the warm-up today. Thinking about, what you might give for let's say here's some examples: an older adult versus a soccer player versus a bodybuilder or a hockey player or a rugby player, or just someone who's looking to improve their overall health. You might find that probably everyone here will have some sort of a different warm-up, right? And again, it depends on the client's goals. It depends on their needs. What are they trying to achieve in their exercise session will determine how you program a warm-up. Okay, and we'll talk about duration of warm-up and things like that, but you're going to see that you can't just give a standard warm-up to every client and, oh, this is going to apply to a bodybuilder and this is going to apply to a soccer player. You're going to see it looks a little bit different, and some people might only need a 10-minute warm-up. Some people might need to do a half an hour warm-up, right? It really depends, right? If you're a soccer player preparing for a game, 10 minutes might not be enough, right? Versus someone who's just going to exercise at the gym at a moderate intensity, they might not need as long of a warm-up. So just some things to think about, that it really depends on who you're working with will determine how you program someone's warm-up and even their exercises, right, as we go through the course. So we're going to start off talking about the warm-up. So I'm going to start off with just a short video here about some kind of background of the warm-up and stretching. So I'm just going to get that video opened up for you and hope that everything works okay. All right, share sound. So let me know at any time if you don't hear anything or something is not working properly.
More than 10 million sports-related injuries occur in the world every year. To avoid this, athletes and coaches alike are using a variety of pre-competition techniques to decrease injuries and increase performance. But what does science tell us about stretching and warming up? Many studies have looked at how stretching can affect athletic performance, and it turns out it depends on the activity. Sports such as figure skating and snowboarding, which require a wide range of motions to impress the judges, certainly benefit from an athlete's flexibility. But for power sports like speed skating and bobsledding, too much stretching may actually cause a temporary decrease in muscle strength. The overstretched muscle becomes less responsive and can stay weakened for up to 30 minutes. Although athletic competitions can be strenuous, there's little evidence to suggest that stretching before or after a competition decreases muscle soreness. Some studies have even noted that extreme flexibility can lead to an increase in the range of stretching without pain. And if you can't feel pain, the body doesn't know when to stop pushing. As a result, injuries can occur. Another large study of athletes found that the least and most flexible participants were 2.5 times more likely to incur an injury. So when it comes to flexibility in competitive sports, it's most beneficial to be moderately flexible. A well-designed warm-up is also extremely beneficial. The term itself comes from the positive effects of raising the temperature of your body before a competition. Slowly increasing physical intensity prior to a sport increases muscle temperature, ultimately allowing your muscles to contract more forcefully. More forceful contractions equals more strength and power. Furthermore, slowly adding movement to your muscles opens up the blood vessels, allowing blood to flow more easily throughout the body and decreases the strain on your heart. Finally, as your blood temperature increases, your blood cells actually hold less oxygen. This loose oxygen is then free to be used by your muscles, increasing overall endurance. Science says it's important not to overstretch it when it comes to flexibility, but physically warming up your body before each specific sport might help you burn the competition. Don't forget, we have a new video out every day during the Olympics. Can't wait?
All right, hopefully that worked and you heard that okay. So no one said anything, so that I hope is a good thing. Okay, just have to go back here. Okay. ASAP Science, good question. It's one of those groups who does really good animations, I can tell you. It is posted, I believe, for you on DC Connect. If you'd like to actually know who made the video, let me tell you. Science, yeah, ASAP Science, you got it. Yeah, you're right. So, yep, that was ASAP Science. Okay. All right, so we'll go back where we were here. So again, really important to just think about after watching that video is that, you know, it might actually be not beneficial if you're too flexible or if you're not very flexible, right? So somewhere in between is probably the most optimal. And some of you maybe who are previous dancers or where you really needed a lot of flexibility for what you were doing, you might, you know, be at more risk for injury. You might have some injuries because of, you know, too much mobility, right? So for example, you know, being able to do the splits, is that necessary? Does everyone need to be able to do the splits for their exercise? No, not necessarily, right? More so for dancers and gymnasts do need that level of flexibility, but that could lead to some instability in the joints and give, you know, a higher risk for injury for some people. So that's just something to think about and to consider. And that also different sports do require a different level of activity or a different also level of flexibility, right? So some activities will require you to be more flexible than others. And if you are, let's say, doing really powerful, explosive movements, you might not want to be too flexible or stretch too much, right? Because you won't be able to generate as much force and power if you're too flexible. So just some things to consider depending on the type of clients that you're working with. So to look at the overview of a warm-up, well, when we warm up, the idea is to perform low intensity exercise to prepare our body for the more intense physical activity, right? So obviously you're not just going to go straight into playing a soccer game going at, you know, almost 100% effort, you know, in bursts. Without warming up, you're probably going to put yourself at a higher risk for injury. The idea with a warm-up is to progress the intensity as you go through your complete warm-up, so slowly increasing intensity. We'll talk about passive versus active, but basically passive means you are not, someone else could be applying resistance and you're not really moving as much. It's more someone is either helping you or you're kind of just doing it passively without too much movement. And then active, you're actually moving. And so we'll look at that. And as we get into it, we'll then talk about general versus specific warm-ups. Okay, so we'll talk about that. And then obviously it's important to understand that the warm up is also increasing our muscle temperature, right? So getting the body warmed up, we're getting primed for the activity we're going to do. Anywhere between 5 to 15 minutes is a good time frame for a warm up. Again, some people might need a little longer. And again, it depends on what you're warming up for. So when we talk about the physiology of warming up, so what's actually happening in our body when we warm up? So a lot of things are happening. So it's not just necessarily warming up the muscles. So yes, we're going to warm up the muscles. We're going to increase our body temperature a little bit. We're going to get more blood flow to the muscles, which is a benefit. So we can get more delivery of energy. So glucose to the muscle, right? And oxygen. The speed of the metabolic reactions increase, which is being able to, for example, make ATP and energy, right? So the speed will be quicker so we can get that energy made. We can contract our muscles. Everyone's happy. As well, we're better able to release oxygen from hemoglobin and myoglobin. Maybe those terms you remember, hopefully. So hemoglobin is the oxygen carrier in the blood, going to bring the oxygen to the muscle, right? And then the myoglobin is going to then take the oxygen that was delivered from the hemoglobin and then deliver it where it needs to go inside the muscle in the mitochondria, right? So that's where we're going to make energy in the mitochondria, and that's what myoglobin is doing. It's inside the muscle and it's going to transport the oxygen in the muscle, where hemoglobin is in the blood, okay? So we're going to get better oxygen delivery, quicker oxygen delivery. So then we're able to, again, make that energy, that ATP. Heart rate is going to go up. Well, that's a good thing, right? Because we want to get our body primed for what we're going to do. Cardiac output goes up. If you remember what cardiac output is, it's a combination of how much blood your heart pumps per beat and how many times your heart is beating, right? So if we can get more blood, pumping, then we're going to get, again, more oxygen delivery and better nutrient delivery to the muscle. So that's a good thing as well. Increased nerve conduction velocity and neural activation. So being able to better recruit our muscles, right? So we're going to get that nervous system primed as well. And that also ties into your mental preparedness and psychological functioning. So not only is it, what's happening in your heart, your lungs, your muscles, thinking of also your central nervous system. So your brain is getting ready, right? You're getting mentally prepared, right? If you don't practice what you're going to be doing, let's say in your sport, let's say you're playing a basketball game. If you never shoot the ball before, you might not think you're mentally prepared as much, right? Or if you're playing volleyball and you're serving the ball, you might want to practice a few before you actually go and play the game. So that's important too. It's also part of your mental preparedness. And also, again, getting the nervous system primed, ready to go, and recruiting the muscles for that activity. Increase oxygen consumption. So again, that is to create energy, as we talked about. Decreased joint and skeletal muscle viscosity and resistance. So that means basically we're getting our joints warmed up, the basically resistance. So how hard is it to move the muscle and joints? We're going to basically reduce that. So it's easier to move our joints and our muscles, right? As we warm up and getting more blood flow, increase the temperature, right? Increase muscle glycogen breakdown glycolysis. Again, we're better able to mobilize our fuel source, which is glycogen, and that is the storage of glucose inside our body. We can break that down so we can now make energy, because we need glucose to make energy. And I already talked about mental preparedness. So understanding that there's a lot of physiological processes that are going on as we are warming up. So in that 5 to 15 minutes, all these things are going to be happening. So when we do warm up, the idea of a warm up is to hopefully improve strength, power, range of motion, speed, agility, and endurance, and getting us ready for that higher intensity activity that we're going to be doing, whether it's a sporting event or just working out at the gym, again, depending on the client's goals and their needs. So we're going to go through the different types of warm up. So there's 3 main categories here of warming up. So we'll talk about the difference between each one. We're going to go through passive, general, and specific warm-ups. So we're going to start with passive warm-ups. Not as common. You might not have heard of this one before and maybe not seen many people do it. If you've done it yourself, let me know. But the idea of a passive warm-up is you just chill and you can take a hot shower. You put a heating pad on your muscles or get a massage. You don't have to do anything, right? You just lie there and get a massage, right? For example. Now, yes, that can prime you for what you're going to do, but this is probably not the only thing you should be doing. And again, a benefit is because you're not really moving much, you're not going to pre-fatigue yourself, but you also do need to prime your nervous system and get yourself ready. Not really practical. You're not just going to go to the gym and sit with heating pads on your legs getting ready to go squat, right? You're probably going to be doing some dynamic stretches and getting yourself ready. So again, not really practical, but for sure at the high level, let's say at the Olympics, some athletes do get like a light massage. It's obviously not a deep tissue massage, but a light massage to prime the muscles getting ready for the activity. So they will do that, but it's in combination with some dynamic stretches, getting them prepared for the activity. So not practical, but yes, it is a way you could warm yourself up, take a hot shower, but usually you're not going to just take a hot shower and go work out. I don't know if anyone's ever done that, but yeah, you'll be warmer, but you'll probably not be fully ready for your exercise session. Now, as we get to more practical types of warming up is a general warm up. So most of you have probably maybe done this before. General warm up, before you actually start your specific dynamic stretches, you'll probably do maybe 5 to 10 minutes of just slow, light activities working through your range of motion. And this is just any kind of cardio. So jogging, walking, skipping. Anyone want to think of any other examples that are not listed here? What else could be a general warm up?
Light activity on the treadmill.
Yep. So walking or jogging on the treadmill. Yep. Anything else? Jumping jacks. I'm going to go jumping jacks as more specific, actually, like a dynamic. So we're just thinking of cardio, just general cardio. Now, yes, you could do a warm up that doesn't require like any of these and just do like some high knees, jumping jacks, jogging. Yes. But as a general warm up, jumping jacks would probably get into more of that specific category. Any other ideas?
Sometimes I just like walking on an incline for like 5 minutes on the treadmill at a good pace.
Yeah, for sure. Just walking on an incline. Yeah, any type of walking for sure.
Mountain climber.
Again, mountain climbers, I'm going to go with more specific. So as we get into the next category, like dynamic stretching. Stair climber, good. So any of the cardio equipment at the gym, cycling, marching, you could say marching is like walking. So yeah, you could do like some light aerobic. And again, some of you are saying jumping jacks, mountain climbers. Again, that's not completely wrong, but it wouldn't fit in the category of general warm up. They're all ways to warm up, but general would just be cycling, rowing, jogging, walking, swimming, which might not be practical for every setting.
Some,
Sorry?
Yeah, some repetitions of joint movements.
So sorry, I couldn't hear. It's a little muffly. If you maybe want to type, it might be easier. So again, any light cardio that any machine at the gym would basically count as probably part of your general warm-up. Okay. So as I said, cycling, walking. So push-ups, George, that's going to be the next category, more specific. Okay. So again, any light cardio. Let's move to the next one, which is specific warm-up. So this is where you're going to now incorporate movements similar to the movements of this sport or activity you're going to do. So great example there, George, push-ups before bench press. This is going to be more specific. So you would do, let's say, walking beforehand as part of the general component. And so typically could be anywhere 8 to 12 minutes. If you're over 12 minutes, that's okay. Again, it really depends on your needs and what you're going to do after your warm-up. And you'll do this focusing on movements that are going to work through the range of motion required for your sport. Okay, so this is where maybe jumping jacks might fit better into this category, or mountain climbers, because now you're going through your dynamic range of motion that you might use in your sports. And the idea is to, again, work on your muscle and skill recruitment. So being able to recruit the muscles appropriately for the activity you're going to do. So great, Jennifer, hip openers before squats. That would fit into this category as a specific warm-up. Use bands for, banded exercises, and you'll learn some near the end of the semester in the lab. But yeah, you could do a warm-up with band exercises as well. Burpees could be an option as well as part of a specific warm-up. So there's so many different exercises you could do as part of a warm-up. We will go through more specific ones in lab. Obviously not every exercise that exists, but to give you an idea of some exercises you could use as part of your specific warm-up. Awesome. So again, understanding the difference here between general and specific, I think you can now see the difference, where general is just like walking, jogging, even skipping, anything that just gets your heart rate up and more blood flow. Nothing specific really to what you're going to be doing. It's just to warm your body up, 5 to 10 minutes, aerobic activity, and then you can go into your specific movements, okay? And that would be all the ones we just discussed, okay? So what would be maybe the most desirable? Which one is going to help you the most for what you're going to be doing? Well, that's probably going to be the specific warm-up. If you were to just, let's say, play a soccer game and you're going to jog around the field for 10 minutes and that's enough, you're probably going to put yourself at risk for injury if you're not warming up some of the muscles that you might be using for the soccer game, right? So the specific warm-up is going to help you the most because it also, not only is it physiologically and getting your muscles primed and your body primed, but also mentally, right? Because again, now you're rehearsing the movements you're going to be using for whatever you're going to do. So for example, let's say you were going to do a heavy squat session, right? And you're going to go squat a 1 rep max. If you don't squat at all before you get to your 1 rep max, maybe not a good idea, right? And typically you're going to gradually build up weight till you get to that weight that you're trying to hit for your 1 rep max, for example, right? So again, you do need to prepare yourself mentally as well, and not only physically. So that's just something to think about as well. So both are good to include. As I said, passive warm-up, not very common, not very practical for most people, but for sure, including maybe a general component and a specific component would be beneficial for most people, okay? So here's just some examples here, just looking at 2 different types of workouts here. So one would be for sprinting and one would be a leg workout, okay? And you'll see the general warm-up could be the same for both activities. You can see here slow jogging, right? For 5 minutes, that's the general warm-up. And that can be used for sprinters or someone doing a leg workout. And you'll see, I'm not going to go through all the exercises here in detail because that's part of the lab more, but some you might, look at them and you're like, okay, yeah, I know what that is. And some you're like, what? That's okay. Again, you might see just different names for the same thing. You see the word, the letters MB, that's a medicine ball. Okay, so like a medicine ball twist where you're twisting your torso, for example. But you'll see that the exercises are going to be a little bit different depending what you're doing, right? A sprinter versus someone just doing a squat workout, you're going to see probably a little bit different for the warm-up, right? Because it's going to be specific to the movement patterns you're going to be using in your activity or sport, right? And if you take a look at for the leg workout at the end, then you're going to start off with light to moderate sets of the squat and build your weight up, right? No one ever is going to just load up 400 pounds on the bar and like, okay, I'm ready to go. You're going to start and you need to warm up and do warm-up sets before you get to your working weight, or you're probably going to hurt yourself or also not be able to do the weight at all. Okay, so just understanding that you're going to probably have some different dynamic specific stretches depending on what you're doing. General warm-up might look the same for some different activities depending what you're doing, okay? So here's a protocol, and this is definitely important and a good one to follow as you are looking at creating a warm-up for someone. So this is a great order to follow, and it's called RAMP, okay? And it obviously stands for these 4 words as we are going to go through them. And the idea is to gradually build up intensity, okay? So for the first component, which is raise, this is the general component, the general warm-up, where we're just working on getting the body temperature increased, increasing heart rate, your breathing is going to increase, getting more blood flow, getting your joints warmed up as well. So this is your general component. You're cycling, you're jogging, rowing, elliptical, walking, anything like that for 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, just to raise the body temperature. Okay, so that would be the first thing you probably want to include. And again, depending on the client's fitness level, will determine what they're starting with, right? Again, if someone is maybe less fit, they're probably going to start with walking versus, someone with a higher level fitness may be able to do a jog before their workout, right? And some people, that 5-minute jog, that's too intense for them. So understanding that going to look different for many people. As we get into the next component, it's activate. And this is where we're going to go into more of those specific movements now. And we're going to focus on muscles in preparation for the upcoming session. So this is like your dynamic stretches, but again, we don't have to get too specific yet as to the movements we're going to be doing. Let's say squatting, for example. We don't have to get there yet. We're just building up our intensity now with activate. So we can maybe do some hip flexor stretching and again, dynamically, which we'll learn, maybe some hamstring dynamic stretches, adductor stretching, anything like that, just to get the muscles ready. And it doesn't have to be specific yet to the activity. So let's say, again, you're playing a soccer game. You might be doing some high knees, some butt kicks, some open and close the gate, anything like that. Again, working on the muscles and the joints that you're going to be using, but we're not as specific yet to the movements we're going to be doing in, let's say, the soccer game. As we get to the next component, mobilize, this is now where we start getting into the movement patterns specific to the sport. So again, if you're doing that lower body workout, you might start doing some body weight squats, maybe some hip thrusts or walking lunges to prepare, again, is that now intensity is going to go up a little bit, getting ready for the exercise session. Maybe going back to the soccer example, you might do some more specific movement patterns and like maybe go into some kicking or some agility movements and some weaving. You might add a ball at this point. It depends, again, on where you are and how intense you are working. And as we get into the last component here, which is potentiation, this is now where you're going to increase the intensity up to where you're going to be working in your exercise session. So again, whether it's at the gym or if it's in a sport. So this is where the intensity is going to go up and be very specific to the intensity you'll be working at. So you might be doing a few sprints. You might be doing, some shots at the net if you're, let's say, playing soccer, and anything, again, as we get specific to that sport, okay? So the idea, as I said, is to gradually increase the intensity here, okay? So starting with just the light aerobic activity, some dynamic stretches, continuing to warm up. And again, doesn't have to be specific yet to the sport. And then again, go into more specific dynamic stretching and into more specific sport movements. So I just see a question here. So good question is, when would you maybe incorporate that self-myofascial release? So you'll probably put it in activate, okay? So you might do your raise component and then do a little bit of rolling and then go into your dynamic stretches because it's kind of helping to, get those muscles primed and the fascia and everything ready for what you're going to do. So I would probably put it after your aerobic activity. So you probably could include it there. Now, again, if you do your dynamic stretches and then you foam roll, again, I don't think it's going to hurt you. It depends on what you feel is best for you. So again, there's no consensus to say, yes, you have to do it at this time, but based on experience in doing it, you could do it right after the aerobic component, but not saying you can't do it after your dynamic stretches. I wouldn't do it at potentiation when you're, at that higher intensity. It's too late at that point. So you're probably going to just do it, somewhere either before or after your dynamic stretches. And then as you get into more of your specific movements, then you probably won't be doing your foam rolling then. So somewhere closer to the beginning. Okay, cool. You used your lacrosse ball. Good. Awesome. Okay, so yeah, that's a good question of when we might put in the self-myofascial release if you choose to use it. So as I said, somewhere in activate is probably the best idea. And then as you get into higher intensity, you probably should have done it beforehand. Okay. Here's an example of a ramp protocol you could use for soccer. So again, you could create one for any sport. If you have a different sport that you like to play or you have played or you currently play. So again, as I talked about, for raise, 5 to 10 minutes, jog around the field, right? So light aerobic activity. Then in activate, you're going to just do some dynamic stretching, not really sport specific yet, but just to get the joints ready and the muscles ready for what you're going to do. And usually, you might be doing this up and down half the field, doing these stretches. And then mobilize, you might get into more specific movements here, that are really going to get the joints primed, as now the intensity is going to go up a bit. And then in potentiation, you're going to now use the soccer ball and do those sport specific movements. This is not the only way you can make a soccer warm up. Obviously, there's many different ways, and I'm sure every coach does something different. So again, understanding there's not one way to do everything. You just have to sequence it appropriately of what would be best for your athletes or your clients. So let's think, and this is a question for you now. What factors might affect the length of a warm-up? So what might be some factors that might make someone's warm-up longer? What might make someone's warm-up shorter? What are some ideas you might have? Okay, good. So if you're more sore, you might warm up longer for sure. It might take a little longer just to get warmed up and then get that soreness a little bit, the pain decrease, because you will feel a decrease in the pain as you warm up. Hydration, potentially. I mean, you want to make sure you're always hydrated. So, I mean, if you're dehydrated, well, you maybe want to make sure you're hydrated before you work out. Fitness level of the client, awesome. So maybe if you have a lower level of fitness, it might take a little longer to warm up. Or if you're working at a low intensity and the client's only going for a walk, you might need a 5-minute warm up, right? If the intensity is lower. So that Taylor said intensity. So on the same lines, how long their session is going to be. Yeah, so time restraints as well. If you only have an hour, then, you know, how long are you going to spend warming up? If it's a half an hour session, then again, you don't want to be warming up for 15 minutes of the session. Intensity, yep. The type of sport for sure. So some sports might require a longer warm up. The room temperature, or if you're running or doing something outside, right? And it's cold outside, you want to make sure you're warm before you go outside. And if you're warming up outside in the cold, then it might take a little longer. Body temperature changes. Okay, so yeah, the climate, how long the activity might last. Yep. So again, depending if you're doing an hour, 2 hours, anything like that. And what is about to be performed, sport, you might need to warm up longer. Yeah, Jennifer, yeah. So again, great, all great. So again, it will be specific to the client, right? So everyone might have different needs. And again, depending on intensity. So here's some ideas of what might affect the length of a warm up. So also age, that's something as well to think about. So an older client might take a little longer to warm up, right? Because, you know, the joints might be a little more stiff as you get older and depending on their activity level to begin with. So also the setting. So let's say you're looking at a group exercise class versus a personal training session. Well, group exercise classes are usually about an hour long, and it's going to be a warm up that everyone's going to do regardless of the fitness level, which might not be tailored to everyone individually, right? So typically 10 minutes or so is given to the warm up, no matter what the client needs. So that's just something to think about. If you are in a group exercise class or teaching one, you're just going to do a warm up for everyone. Whereas some people might need a little longer till they feel they're ready, but that's typically how it goes with a group class. Whereas personal training, if you're one-on-one, then you could really tailor to that client's needs. The type of exercise you're going to do, if you're playing a sport, you're probably going to warm up a little longer than for someone who's just going to work at a moderate intensity at the gym, for example. Depends. How much time you have. As I said, if you're doing half an hour session or an hour, well, obviously that might affect how long your warm-up is going to be. What are you doing? What is your goal? Are you, again, training at the gym? Are you an athlete? What is your goal? What is the purpose of your warm-up? What are you preparing yourself for, right? And then the training status of the client. So again, for someone who may be in less shape, you don't want to be doing a half an hour warm-up. They're going to be exhausted by the time they're done their warm-up. So you might just do, you know, a few dynamic stretches, maybe some walking before or some cycling just to get, you know, the body warmed up, and then go into their session if they're not working at a high intensity. So the higher intensity you're going to be working at, you're going to need maybe a little bit longer of a warm-up because you really need to build up that intensity so you're ready to go when you're working in your exercise session at that high intensity, right? So that's something to think about as well. So you're going to have to think about it as you work with different people and the needs of different clients. Okay, so if anyone has questions at any time, feel free to let me know. So when we think about resistance training status and classifying a client, like, okay, someone who's a beginner or intermediate or advanced, right? You might give this for someone who's advanced or this for someone who's beginner. Well, what categorizes someone into beginner or advanced? And we're going to go through this in a little bit more detail as we get into program design. But just briefly, if we were to say someone is beginner, this is usually someone who's never trained before, or they just started training and they kind of still don't know what they're doing. That would be someone who's a beginner. And so at the end of the day as well, it's your discretion to determine what level you think your client is at. This is a tool you can use to kind of work through, but you might have a little bit of arbitrary answers here because, oh, well, they just started working out, but they have been off for 2 years. So they've worked out before. So, are they still beginner? Maybe they were really consistent and really advanced before, but, they took a couple of years off, right? So yeah, they're technically beginner right now, but they should be able to progress a little bit faster than someone who's never trained before, right? If we look at intermediate, this is someone who's been training maybe 2 to 6 months, so more recently, and basic techniques, still needs to work on technique. Their skill is not the greatest, and they don't train that intensely yet. So that could be intermediate. And again, we're going to go through this in more detail in a few weeks. And then as we see advanced, someone who's been training for a long time, they know what they're doing, their technique is great, and they know how to work at a high intensity. So that's kind of how you could look at it. And that will kind of help guide you as you're creating someone's program, that, if they're beginner or advanced, and how hard you should make their workouts, and as well their warm-up. That might determine how long their warm-up might be, and maybe how intense their warm-up is, right? Because some people might be able to do more intense, let's say, dynamic stretches in their warm-up versus someone who might need just some light dynamic stretching in their warm-up. So that's just something to think about, the client's training status before they come in to their training sessions. So when we talk about stretching here, you probably have heard dynamic and static stretching. But if you were to just tell your client, okay, you're going to do stretching Monday, Wednesday, Friday, right? Okay, well, what does your client think stretching is? Is it dynamic or static? A lot of people who are not really familiar with the difference, they're probably going to assume when you say stretching, it's holding something for a period of time. So if you were actually prescribing dynamic stretches, you should be explicit and say, yes, these are your dynamic stretches where you are actually moving while you're stretching. And DWU is dynamic warm-up. Okay, so typically we'll talk about this, but you can do that before your exercise session. And then after the session, you can include some of the static stretching. So it is important as a trainer to educate your clients and explain the difference between dynamic and static stretching. To you, that might be easy. I get it. I understand the difference. But for some people, it is hard to understand, okay, this is a dynamic stretch and this is a static stretch. Once you've taught them, they will get it, but they just need you to teach them first. So never just say stretching in general, because people might perceive this as dynamic or static and you don't know. So let's say, your warm up, you're going to do stretches. What's that, right? They might do all static stretching in their warm up because they didn't know you meant dynamic. Okay, so that's something to think about when you are creating a program, to really just be specific of what you want that client to do, whether it's dynamic or static stretching. All right, so just here's some images of what people might perceive to be flexible. The picture on the left might be a little bit weird as you look at it. Obviously, it's a cropped picture, but it's quite funny. And these are extreme levels of flexibility. Do you really need to be able to do the splits? I'm going to say no, that's not necessary, to be determined as fit, right? You don't need to be able to do the split. So just some extreme levels here. Obviously, the one on the left is not real, but the other ones are kind of extreme levels of flexibility, right? And we know that can increase someone's risk of injury. So let's talk about the difference between dynamic and static stretching. Now, in your slides, if you were to open them up, these pictures move. It's just that the way that I posted them here on Zoom, they're not moving, but the images are GIFs, so they do move. I don't know if you say GIF or GIF, whatever, but the pictures do move. So that's dynamic stretching. And again, we're going to be doing this in the lab, but understanding the difference. So dynamic, we stretch while in motion. The idea is to prepare us for the exercise or sport we're going to do, improve our blood flow, activate our central nervous system, obviously beneficial to prevent injury. And again, the idea is to help enhance your strength, power, range of motion for what you're going to do, so you're able to execute your exercises with enough power and force. And also improve performance, right? Again, if you didn't do any stretching beforehand, you might find you're really stiff. You're going to start feeling aches and pains everywhere. Especially as you get older, those aches and pains come on a lot quicker, especially if you don't stretch. So I've had a friend who, was a runner many years, and she never stretched before. Then all of a sudden, all these aches and pains started coming as she got older. And like, maybe if you did some actual warm up and worked on your mobility a bit, it wouldn't have that. But she just would take like an Advil before she ran to not feel pain. But don't do that. That's not a good idea. You need to address your problems and not take a painkiller. So again, yeah, you might get away with it, not warming up much and going for a run, but eventually it will catch up to you. So even just doing 10 minutes of dynamic stretching before your run will help you in the long run. And then the next component here, static stretching. So again, this is stretching without motion. Typically, you would do this after you are done your exercise or sport. Again, if you are not able to do it immediately after your exercise session or sport, you could do it, later on before bed. It's as long as you do it, it will be beneficial. Now, we'll talk about incorporating static stretching as part of a warm-up. Can you or can you not? We'll discuss that, but just understanding the difference at this point. So yes, static stretching can improve range of motion, right? And you're just holding a stretch for a period of time. Yes, it's going to help maintain mobility in the joints. And you might be asking yourself, okay, but how long should we hold these stretches? Can I do 2 minutes each leg, or should I just do it for 30 seconds? How long, right? And so based on the literature, about 10 to 30 seconds for 2 to 4 repetitions is what will increase flexibility. So you could do 10 to 15 seconds, repeat that 2 times on a leg, and then you can switch to the other leg. So a total of about 30 seconds you could do. So that has been shown to increase flexibility. If you were to do a minute long instead, and you decided to hold your stretches for longer, yes, it will increase your range of motion, but not significantly more than if you just did 30 seconds. So if you are short for time, you'll get the same benefit pretty much of just doing 30 seconds rather than doing a minute. So not always more is better. And 90 seconds is also pushing it at that point. So 30 seconds is good. If you were to program static stretching as part of a cool down for someone, I would say 30 seconds, like each side, depending what you're doing, is probably good to program. We'll talk about what you might prescribe for part of a warm up if you were to give static stretching. I won't answer that question yet. So just understanding that, yes, static stretching is good. Okay. It's not bad for you. It's not like don't ever do static stretching. Just might be more beneficial after a workout. And especially if you're going to go into like more intense, deeper stretches, then definitely after a workout would probably be beneficial. Okay. Especially for older adults as well, the static stretching is probably going to be the best for them. So we're going to quickly just summarize the cool down. And again, this is where you would incorporate your static stretching. But what is the purpose of a cool down? Why do we need to cool down after we are done our sport or exercise? So the idea is to return back to our pre-exercise levels, our homeostasis, back to resting levels, okay? And transition from that higher intensity to pre-exercise levels. Well, if you're working at a higher intensity, you're going to definitely need to cool down. I don't know if anyone's ever, done sprints or really high intensity to the point where you can't breathe, and then you just stop and you're like, yeah, I'm done. Usually you're going to have to walk it off. You're going to have to cool down until you get your breathing back to normal. Your heart rate comes back down, right? Now, if someone was just going for a walk as their exercise program for that day, they might not need as long of a cool down because their heart rate hasn't gone up that much to begin with, right? So just things to consider. Intensity will play a role in how long the cool down is, okay? What are some benefits of a cool down? Well, as I said, going to bring your heart rate down, your breathing is going to come back down. We're going to bring our body temperature back to normal, getting our muscles back to their optimal length tension relationships. Also, another thing, if you were to just, let's say, go for an intense run and stop and just stand there, you're going to get all the blood pooling into your lower extremities, into your legs. And then you might pass out if you just stop. And you sometimes feel like a little dizzy if you were to just stop right after. So definitely you need to walk it off. And when you do a fitness assessment and you go through some of the more intense protocols, if you just were to stop, it's not going to feel good. If anyone has ever done or heard of a Wingate test, where you go all out for 30 seconds on the bike with a resistance against basically like a percent of your body weight, if you were to just stop after that, you're going to throw up or you're going to pass out. So it's really important. Again, if you're working at that higher intensity, you definitely need a cool down till you feel like, okay, I'm getting back to kind of my resting state and getting back to that baseline level. So as I said, if someone's working at a lower intensity, they're not working that hard, then the cool down can maybe be 5 minutes and that's enough for them. Okay, so it really depends on what the client is doing. And this is where you can add in some of the static stretching. You may just walk it off, and then later on that day, you can do some static stretching if you'd like. If your mobility is already really good to begin with, do you need to do a lot of static stretching? Maybe not. If that's something you need to improve, then you may want to incorporate that into your programming or your client's programming. So it's going to really be dependent on the individual, right? So you might prescribe a lot of static stretching, you might not. And maybe client has tight hips, you might just really focus on that in the area around the hips, then their upper body, for example. Okay. So here's a question. What do you think is better? Is dynamic stretching better or static stretching better? What are your thoughts on that? Do you think one is better than the other? Yeah, based on the situation, okay. Both are necessary. Anyone else? Okay, so dynamic before, static after. Dynamic better for most cases. Yep, and so great answer so far. Okay, so I'm gonna go with it depends, right, on the person. And someone might benefit more from doing some dynamic mobility work or dynamic stretching versus static, right? Now, some clients might be more beneficial to them to do some static stretching as well. So it's going to depend. Again, you might have heard, no, don't do static stretching, it's bad. No, that's not true, right? Some people, it might be more beneficial for them to add some static stretching. And again, dynamic stretching, you can have more intense dynamic stretches and more, less intense dynamic stretches as well. So you can decide what type of dynamic stretches someone does as well. And some dynamic stretching is deeper into, some of the stretches and mobility work, and then some are not, right? So that might impact, what you're going to prescribe for someone based on their level of mobility. You might not give them those intense dynamic stretches. So there's no answer that one is better than the other. It's going to depend. It's going to depend on the client's needs and what is their flexibility level to begin with. Okay, and so some people who are really have really poor flexibility, they might benefit from adding some static stretching, on a daily basis, added into their programming. It doesn't have to be at the gym, it can be at home as well. Okay, so it depends is your answer to that one. You won't get a test question on that and have to choose. So let's get into soft tissue work a little bit here. And this is what we did in the lab. Okay, so using the foam roller and lacrosse ball as examples of what we have used. So we're going to just talk more about the background behind it. Why would we use it? Why do we care? And the different types of soft tissue work. So first we need to define what soft tissue is, right? So soft tissue is helping to connect, support, or surround other structures and organs of the body. So we have the muscles, the fascia, ligaments, tendons, joint capsules are all components of soft tissue, okay? And so when we are doing this self-myofascial release, we're not really working on the ligaments and the tendons specifically. That's more the stretching is going to help with that. Not really the joint capsule. So we're kind of more focusing on the muscles and the fascia, okay? So the fascia is again, self-myofascial release fascia, right? So that's what we're really trying to work on here. And so what is the fascia? So if you take a look at this image at the top here, it's kind of like a very dense spider web, right? And where's the fascia located? Well, if you take a look at the image on the bottom, we know that the fascia does surround the muscle, okay? And there's actually different layers. So we have superficial fascia, you can see under the skin, and we have deep layers of fascia as well. So we don't just have one, layer of fascia. There's several layers that, are surrounding the muscle and under the skin as well, okay? And the fascia is like an extensive network that connects our skin, muscles, organs, and nerves. So it's kind of helping hold everything together because your organs aren't just floating in your body, okay? The fascia is actually helping to kind of like hold kind of your tissues to like your organs to kind of hold everything in place. So, nothing's just floating around everywhere, right? And then also helping to kind of enclose the muscle too and protect the muscle, right? So think of it as like a plastic wrap that's kind of all around, and it's more like a spider web that's kind of holding everything together. And so it can be looked at as a whole body communication network outside of your nervous system, and it's capable of receiving and transmitting information from inside and outside the body. So the fascia, it obviously doesn't have nerves in it, but it does respond to, pressure on it, and, it will receive and transmit information as well. But again, not to the same extent of like neurons, right? There's no nerves in the fascia. And it connects and influences every system in your body. So we have these fascial networks kind of throughout our body, and we have, like anterior and posterior, and just think that everything is connected, right? If you're working on, let's say, your legs, well, that can actually be connected to your back, or your trapezius can be connected to your hips, right? So it's not that everything is isolated. So if we're working on our IT band, for example, or let's say our quadriceps, it's not always isolated. Everything is connected. So that's something to think about as well, that if you feel pain somewhere, it might not actually be from that spot. It might be radiating from somewhere else and you're just feeling it there, right? Again, this is not a physiotherapy course, but just understanding why we're trying to target the fascia. And the fascia, again, is, and we'll talk about when you feel pain there, but it can get kind of tight. And think of this web as getting tight, and it's not as pliable, right? Where if it like stretches and moves easily, that's good, versus like it's very rigid. Okay, so let's look at what a fascia mobility block is. Okay, so this is where, again, when you were rolling, so either on the foam roller or on the ball, you might have got to a spot where it feels like there's a bruise there. There's no bruise. You look, there's no bruise, right? So you might feel sore and achy in a certain area, and this can be called a fascia mobility block, or we can call it knots, right? You might feel a knot somewhere. And so what is a knot? This is like a malalignment of your tissue. It could be due to trauma or injury that you might have had in that area. Maybe poor motor patterns. So maybe, if when you're walking, you're actually walking with your feet pronated, and, you're not actually, maybe you're putting more weight on one foot than the other two. So poor motor patterns could cause this as well. And even emotional distress. So if you're stressed, hopefully we can manage that throughout the semester as it gets more busy, but those trapezius muscles, or we call them trapezius bones, can get tight, and that's definitely an indicator of where a lot of people carry their stress. So now you have the lacrosse balls, and you know what to do when you feel a lot of tension there is to roll them out. But for sure, stress can also affect your fascia. So you also might be dehydrated. So again, obviously we are made up of a lot of water, so it's important to make sure you're staying hydrated. Your muscles need to stay hydrated. And again, that's important. So dehydration can play a role. Fascial mobility block, is that a trigger point? Yes, basically a trigger point, and not anything where you feel that pain like it's a bruise there. Pretty much the same thing. Yeah. Lack of sleep can also cause these again, fascial mobility blocks, and you're just tense everywhere, right? So your body's not recovering, especially if you are training intensely and you're not sleeping. It's going to be harder to recover. Maybe nutritional imbalances. Are you eating a well-balanced diet? Hormonal imbalances could play a role. Now, good news is that we can work on that, right? And so we can incorporate, even our dynamic movements can help with that. But in combination with self-myofascial release has been shown to help with, improving these mobility blocks. Now, you might not relieve it in one session. It might take time, right? And you want to work on it over time. You might just have some bad areas, right? So you might find your trapezius is like one of those bad spots, or as you probably found, where your serratus and your lats might be really bad. So if you work on it over time, it should not be as bad as you try to work on that. And then you need to consider these other factors, right? Are you sleeping? Are you stressed? Are you hydrated? All these other factors too, okay? So when we are now applying, okay, well, we want to try to kind of release some of that tension and the fascia before we exercise. So we have different tools we can use, right? And so the ones that you're probably familiar with now is the lacrosse ball and the foam roller. And there's a lot of other tools out there. So if you take a look here, the image on the right, we see a stick, right? A rolling stick. And this one is similar to the foam roller, but in the sense that you can actually control the pressure that you apply on that specific area. Whereas on the roller, it's your body weight. You can only take off so much weight, and then it might still be too much, right? Whereas the stick, you can push as hard as you want. A good thing about the stick as well is you can get into certain areas that it's really harder to get with the foam roller. So for example, your tibialis anterior, your front of your shin area, obviously not the bone, but beside it, that can be tight on a lot of people, especially if you're doing like a lot of walking and running and cycling. That might get tight, and that stick is really good to get into that area. It might be a little bit harder and more awkward and maybe more painful to get into with the foam roller. So even calves, for me, the foam roller is quite painful for the calves. So I like to use the stick for it, and I can control the amount of pressure I put. So another tool you can use, it's not saying one is better than the other. They're just all kind of beneficial in their own way. And we said the lacrosse ball is beneficial because we can get into certain areas and more targeted areas, right? So here's a whole bunch of other tools you could use, or maybe you've seen them before. And again, all of them have their advantages or disadvantages, and it's whatever works best for you and whatever you like the most. So if you take a look, we'll start kind of on the right side here, like the peanut ball, the black one here, the peanut ball. So that one you could put like at the base of your neck. Okay, you could put it and roll like along your spine, because obviously there's nothing in the middle that's rolling on your actual spine. So on your like erectors along the sides of your spine. So it could be beneficial for that, even on the calves. So you could use it on different areas as well. So it's kind of called the peanut ball. And again, has its advantages. And another option you could use, some people just take two lacrosse balls and tape them together. You could do that too. At the bottom here, the therapy balls. So these are just basically a little bit squishier than the lacrosse ball, so less firm. So the less firm ball you have, a little bit less pain, might be better for you. And they also come in this bag, so you could keep them in the bag and then use them in the bag, so you don't have to buy a peanut ball as well. So that's kind of the benefit. Plus they are a little bit less firm. So that's the difference there. And a lot of yoga studios like that one and use it in classes as well. The alpha ball here at the bottom is just basically a bigger lacrosse ball, but also a little softer. So just a little bit of a bigger ball. And again, we can get into kind of bigger areas there as well with that ball. Do you need it? No. If you like it, go ahead, use it, right? So it really depends on what your needs are and what you like. As we go up above that alpha ball is this blue ball here with those little spikes on it. So now we're just adding in some grooves into the ball, and gets into different areas, and can get a little bit deeper in some areas, a little bit firmer than the other ones. I would say probably not as firm as the lacrosse ball, but it's pretty firm. And these ones you could actually heat or heat them up or put them in the freezer, and they can be cold too. So that's an option. And again, there's so many things out there. Do you need them all? No. But again, as I said, other options. And again, it's a bigger size than the lacrosse ball, can get into bigger areas. To the left of that is the rolling sticks, right? As we talked about, but these ones have grooves in them. So just another tool that you could use. Dollarama sells sticks now, I believe. They might break a little bit sooner, but hey, if you don't want to invest in like a $30 stick, go for it for like $4 probably. You could get a stick, and I think they might sell ones like similar to this, but there's grooves in it. So the idea is, and to get into like some areas here. So that is the rolling stick, and just some different types here. I just see a question about the ball. Yeah, the microwave typically, yeah, you would heat it in the microwave. That's how those work. Yeah, I think in the oven it might melt. So yeah, it's a microwave. If we take a look at the bottom, the orange, that is the same foam roller you saw in the lab. They have even a smaller one. So it's like a third of the size of the one that you were using. So I don't know, maybe they were like just over a foot long. So much smaller, and then it's advertised, easier to travel with, but you can't get into as much of a surface area, but it'll do the job, because you never roll on the whole roller anyways. So just another option. Is it necessary? No. If you're traveling a lot and you want one to carry around in your backpack, doesn't take up half the backpack, sure, that one can work. Let's go to the top left. You might have seen this before. It's the TerraGun. This is electric, so you charge it and basically you press a button, turn it on, and it will kind of vibrate. So the piece at the end, there's different attachments you could add on to kind of hit different areas with different attachments, but it's a massage gun. So that brand is called TerraGun, but there's a lot of knockoffs, much cheaper versions, still do pretty much the same thing. And it's a massage gun. So the idea is, again, it's trying to give you a massage, trying to break up the fascia and the mobility blocks that you might have. And you can adjust the intensity. So it's the speed of how quick that piece is moving. And it feels really good. So again, target different areas. It just might be hard to get on your back because you got to reach. And if you've ever used one, if you've ever done it on your traps, it feels like your whole brain is vibrating. It feels weird, but again, another option. It is good. You could use that, and again, you could use that and not have to see a massage therapist, depending how bad your tension is. Then the last one at the bottom here is like a stick that usually it's like you go over your head and then you can hit into different trigger points there. Not as commonly used. You're probably not going to see them at the gym. But again, another tool you might have seen and might be thinking, oh, what about that one? Yes, it exists. They're all different tools you can use. You decide what you like the best and what works for you. You can get away with a lacrosse ball and you should be fine. And you have your own now, right? So you could actually use that on your own time, all the time now. So up to you, right? And as I said, there's not one better method than really the other. What do I like the most? Good question there, Jordan. What I usually use at home is I foam roll and I lacrosse ball. I do have a knockoff version of the massage gun. I like it if I do feel really tense. The only thing is I'm usually short for time because my son, I have a certain time frame. So I don't have time to do that, but sometimes before bed, I might do that a bit. It feels really good on like the quads, the IT band, the calves, the tibialis, even at the bottom of your foot. I know some of you were saying you like to roll the lacrosse ball on the bottom of your foot. The massage gun feels good there too. Where can you buy foam rollers? Good question. I'm honestly, Amazon, you can probably find everything on Amazon. I don't think foam rollers you can find at Dollarama. Yeah, probably Walmart. Pretty much every store does sell them. But where do you want to get a good one? Then, okay, so Amazon, you can probably get a good one. Winners, Sport Check. So the dollar store does have a full-on massage. Yeah, I think they do, but maybe the less the less dense one. So yeah, lots of options. Up to you. Specific brand, not really. I mean, they're all very similar. Just again, some will be more durable than others. Like the white one we have in the lab, it's not as durable. Or even the blue ones, like it's easy to get dents in them. If you roll over something that's a little bit hard, it will like dent it. So the more durable ones are like the ones with that PVC pipe in the middle and then the foam on the outside. It's up to you how much money you want to spend on one. Okay, so if you want to go to the dollar store and get one because you don't want to spend a lot of money, it'll still work. Again, maybe not as well as one that might be a little firmer, but everyone's going to start somewhere too. So it depends on the roller. And that brings us to the next slide too. As we're talking about foam rollers right now, there's the different types, right? And I did talk about that in the lab. So the only one that we don't have in the lab, which is another option before you get to the one with the pipe, PVC pipe, or the plastic inside and the foam on the outside, is this hard roller that's foam, but even more dense than the blue one that was in the lab. So there's another one in between. Also, again, at the gym, if a lot of different people are using them at the gym, they do get damaged quite easily. Whereas the rumble roller, you can call it the rumble roller or the grid roller, those ones are a lot more durable. So up to you. I think the rumble rollers now, if anyone knows, go for about like 30 bucks. You probably can get, it doesn't have to be the same brand of like the top of the line. They probably still do very similar jobs. You could probably get maybe a little cheaper than that, maybe on Amazon. So up to you. Again, if you want, I can look up something on Amazon and tell you what looks good. But yeah, I do recommend. I mean, it's great. And if you do it consistently, you will probably notice a difference, especially lots of sitting, right? And at least you get to be in the lab 1 day a week, but hopefully you're not sitting on the other 6 days of the week, right? So yeah, we talked about the different rollers already. The white ones are the lightest. So I recommend at least getting a blue, or if you can find the black ones, it depends on the store. You won't find those everywhere to start off with. And then you could progress to the rumble type roller. There is the ones we had in the lab were orange and black. I believe there's also a green one, or it's green on the inside, and the foam is even a little bit more gentle. If that is like too painful for you, then you're going to have to start with something lighter. You could also even start with the stick too. So that's another option if you wanted to do the handheld stick, where you get to control your own pressure. The only disadvantage is you can't do that nice thoracic spine rollout as well. So you can't do that on your back. Okay, there's also pink too. Yeah, so there's different colors, which usually indicate different foam density levels on those. Okay, so feel free. If you want, I can look on Amazon at the end of class and see what I like based on what's there, because I haven't looked because I have my own, so I'm not buying them, but definitely, yeah, something to consider. Okay, Walmart, there you go. So Walmart's an option as well. I'm sure you can find it Walmart. All right, awesome. So yeah, we can look at some good options, but yeah, it doesn't hurt to have your own. Okay, let's look at the research now of some self-myofascial release. So what's the evidence behind doing self-myofascial release? So basically you're your own massage therapist at this point. You might not get as deep as a massage therapist would if you have really bad areas. But if you do this, you know, on a regular basis, it's a good maintenance tool to use. So you're not going to get as bad as you would if you didn't do it at all. So let's look at the first article here. So we're going to just look at kind of the summary of each article. If you want to read the full article, you're more than welcome to click on the link and take a look. And you should be able to click it from the slides. You have to download them. So the first one, and when we see meta-analysis, this is basically taking all the different research and putting it together and making a summary. So we don't have to do it ourselves. People do that for us, where you look at literature reviews or meta-analysis, kind of take all the data and make conclusions from the data. So what can we see here? The effects of foam rolling on performance and recovery. So effects on performance and recovery are rather and partly negligible, which means we don't really see much of an increase in performance, okay? And so the thing is that we see is we don't see a decrease in performance, so that's good. Minor increase in sprint performance, okay? So maybe a small increase in performance we might see, but not much. We might see a little bit of an increase in flexibility, maybe a little bit of a reduction in delayed onset muscle soreness by doing it. If we look at jump performance or strength performance, very negligible, which means not a big difference. And we really don't know the research yet on the exact prescription, like you should do 2 sets of this many reps or time, and that's going to give you optimal results. Now, again, for anything, it's not always more is better, right? You don't need to do foam rolling for an hour a day to get the results from it. So as we've talked about, we'll kind of conclude, but 30 seconds each side will probably give you benefit. Do you need to do it for 2 minutes a side? Probably not. Is it going to give you much more benefit? Maybe not. Okay. So kind of similar to as we looked at static stretching. Is more better? Not necessarily. Okay. Then the next article here is another review of literature, and we're looking at the effects of self-myofascial release using a foam roller or roller massager on range of motion of joints, muscle recovery, and performance. Okay, so we're looking at all these factors, and You're more than welcome to read the abstract, and the article link is there for you. But what can we conclude from this article? Well, we see some short-term effects on increasing joint range of motion without negatively affecting performance. That's a good thing. We don't want to see any of the tools of using foam rollers or any self-myofascial release decreasing performance. Then that's not a good thing. We might see, so here's some words that you might not be familiar with. Attenuate decrements. What does that mean? Well, basically, it's going to decrease the decrease in muscle performance. So basically, you're going to lessen the decrease in muscle performance and DOMS after intense exercise. So let's say you were doing an intense exercise session one day, you are sore now, and now you are going to do some foam rolling. You might not have as much of a decrease in performance if you were to do foam rolling while you're sore. Okay, so that's what that means. So just, I know that you might see two words, you're like, what does that mean? That's what it means. It's kind of decreasing the decrease, if that makes sense. So less of a decrease in performance if you were to roll, okay, when you're sore. And so short bouts of self-myofascial.
I'm sorry.
Sorry?
I'm sorry. I don't understand what, I still don't understand.
Okay, I'll repeat myself again. No problem.
Thank you.
So, okay, so when you exercise intensely, you get sore, right? And when you're sore, usually your performance will go down a little bit because you're sore and it's harder to, you know, achieve power or strength because you're sore and obviously your muscles need to repair. So we're going to see probably a decrease in performance when we're sore. So if we were to add foam rolling into that, and so we're sore and we're going to foam roll now on the day I'm sore, and then I'm going to train, we don't see as much of a decrease in performance as we would if we did not foam roll. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
That's better. Okay. So I'll say it one more time. So again, we're sore, we foam roll, now we perform. Our performance is not going to go down as much as if maybe we didn't foam roll. It's going to kind of offset as much of the decrease in performance as if we didn't do foam rolling at all. And the point is, it may help. So it's not saying it's definitive that if you're sore and you foam roll, you can go squat heavy 2 days in a row. That's probably not going to happen. It's not a cure. Okay, so hopefully that clears it up for some of you if that wasn't clear. And so we see short bouts of doing self-myofascial release prior to exercise. We don't see any effect on performance. So you're not going to be an elite sprinter if you foam roll. You're not going to lift 1,000 pounds if you're foam rolling, right? So we don't really see much of a significant effect on performance. Okay, but again, it's not going to decrease performance. That's important because then that's not good. We don't want to do it and decrease performance. And again, no consensus on an optimal program. We don't really know, how many sets, how long to do it for, what is optimal for maybe different populations or generally. Okay. And so the last one here, and again, you're more than welcome to take a look at the link, but it's kind of a summary of different literature, and on the website is where you do see kind of the citations for the content here. So we can see foam rolling has been shown it could possibly increase flexibility acutely and chronically. Okay, so again, right away, we might see a little bit of an increase in flexibility. Are you going to be able to do the splits after? Probably not, if you've never been able to do them. But we might see some increases. And you might have noticed already, if you were doing some of the foam rolling in the lab, you might see, oh, okay, my range of motion is improved a little bit. And I notice it when I do it. So I agree that yes, it can increase your flexibility acutely. And if you were consistent at doing it, so you can't foam roll once a week and expect to, cure everything and no pains and your flexibility is amazing. It has to be on a consistent basis, and that's important. And that's with anything with exercise and getting the results from an exercise program, you have to be consistent. So the chronic adaptations would have to be consistently rolling. And again, we don't know how many days a week, what's a minimum, but probably 3 to 5 times a week is ideal. If you could do a little bit every day, probably doesn't hurt you. Okay. And we don't see a negative impact on performance. Great. We don't want that to happen, right? We don't want to see it decreasing performance. And so some of the literature shown not much of a difference between 20 seconds or 60 seconds of, let's say, doing some rolling. We see similar outcomes. So again, we don't really know, right? What's that sweet spot? Should we just do 20 or do you want to do 60, right? Is there any benefit of going longer? So we might not see much extra benefit from going longer. Multiple sets is shown to be ideal. So where you're doing, let's say, 10, 20 seconds on one side, going the other side and coming back and repeating and coming back, we might see, because we're going to get blood flow to that tissue as we kind of move to the other side. And then we might even feel a little bit less tension when we come back to it for the second time. Okay, and we take a look as well at delayed onset muscle soreness, as we talked about. We can see that it's reduced the sensation of delayed onset muscle soreness. The problem with delayed onset muscle soreness is that it's hard to measure it, right? How do you measure, how sore someone is? How do you know that one person's more sore than the other? Someone might just have a better pain tolerance than someone else, right? So it's really hard to say, well, yeah, it decreases soreness. Well, the best way to figure that out is do it yourself. And if you do notice you're less sore, okay, well, then it probably works for you, right? It's a hard thing to measure, right? You can't just take a muscle biopsy and be like, oh, this person's less sore than this person. Not the most, or not really a good way to measure soreness. So that's something to think about as well, that, if you are looking at literature and soreness, how do we measure it? Everyone perceives pain differently. So that's something to think about. And then it is beneficial to do it with a dynamic warm-up. So usually, like, not by itself, you're probably going to do it with your dynamic stretches. And so as we talked about, if you were to incorporate it in a warm-up, you'll probably do it either before or after your dynamic stretches. So again, we don't know that, yes, you have to do before. No, it's okay, you can do it after too. We don't know. So again, you're going to have to kind of play with it yourself and see what works for you. You might not notice a difference. I've probably done it before where I've stretched and I forgot to roll, so I roll after. Didn't notice much of a difference. So again, it's going to come down to individual preference as well. So if you find I like to do my dynamic stretches, then roll, go for it, do it. That's fine. Okay. So there's not one way to do everything. Okay. So that's now going to shift our focus into the question that I brought up before. Can we do static stretching in a warm-up? Are we allowed? Is it going to hurt us, right? And that's something you might have thought about before. So the article is posted for you on DC Connect, and I do want you to read the article. This is definitely a good one to read, and it's, again, another review of all the literature, but looking at the acute effects of static and dynamic stretching on performance. Okay, so do we see a decrease in performance if we do include static stretching in a warm-up? So should we include static stretching in a warm-up? Why or why not? There is a discussion post for this week. It is not worth marks, but if you'd like to participate and kind of give your idea, just type, a few sentences of your ideas. I'm going to kind of give you the answer, but you can go ahead and type your thoughts on it. And again, based on maybe your experience as well. But before we go and answer this, what are your thoughts? Do you think that maybe it's okay to add some static stretching, or, someone should only do dynamic stretching in a warm up and they should just keep those static stretches in the cool down? What do you think?
Well, I was reading the article already in our discussion post, the same article, and I like how David Bem, the research author, how he described it. He said there's kind of like, it depends on the client. There's like a Goldilocks zone for certain individuals. And like, if you were to train an average person, a good balance of static stretching and a little bit of dynamic seems to be the way to go. Like guy who plays golf every weekend. But if you've got someone like Sidney Crosby, I watched this video on the TED Talk. He's talking about like high intense athletes, like sprinters, hockey players, where you want to prime the muscle for activation, not in a static sense, because it'd be more like just flexibility, but you need more of that dynamic activation to the muscle, like short duration, quick burst, dynamic stretching. So I kind of like how he compared them to like cars. If you're like an average person, you're sort of like a van. You just need that primer just to keep going. But if you're like Cindy Crosby or like a Ferrari, or if you're like a sprinter, so you have to do more quick pace dynamic stretching. So I think it just depends on the who you're working with, really, in general.
Yeah, awesome. You literally just summarized the video. So now no one has to watch it. But yeah, you basically summarized the video. So that's basically a summary of what Dr. Bain was talking about. And he's the researcher in the article too. So it's him talking about the article basically and summarizing it. So definitely watch the TED Talk that is posted as well on DC Connect. Really great to watch. Okay. And I just see another comment here. So combination of both dynamic is more preferable. Okay. So yeah. Okay, so I'm just reading yours, Jennifer. Yeah. So yeah, again, it depends on what that client's doing. If they're going for, let's say, they're a power lifter and they're looking to lift maximal weight for a deadlift, you're probably not going to do much static stretching. You want those hamstrings to be a little tight. So like elastic band, so they can recoil and we can execute a lot of power, right? Whereas, you know, if you're that general population and you're just working out of the gym looking to get fit, again, really different spectrums here, then you're probably okay if you did a little bit of static stretching. So if your goal is to generate a lot of force and power, I mean, you could include a little bit of static stretching. It probably won't hurt, but you shouldn't be holding the stretches for too long and working on maybe a few muscle groups that you'd like to target. That might be okay. But that's where you want to think about and maybe be a little careful of how much static stretching you're going to do. Whereas, you know, if it's just someone who is looking to get fit, it might not hurt them if they were to do it. Okay, so it really, really depends on the client. And let's go through the rest of the slides here. Yeah, the static stretching, relaxing effect on the muscles, yes, and also we're lengthening the muscle. So again, we want an optimal length tension relationship, and different sports, you know, will require, you know, a little bit tighter muscles or maybe a little bit looser muscles, right? And so maybe some, let's say, gymnasts are going to maybe need to do a little bit of static stretching to try and get deeper into lengthening the muscles for whatever they're doing, right? So again, really depends on the activity. So let's take a look at kind of summarizing the research and the article here. So we know dynamic warm-ups enhance performance. They're good, do them, great. Okay, so they're great to include in a warm-up. Now, static stretching in a warm-up. If you were to do static stretching by itself with no dynamic stretching, that's where we're going to see the performance decline. Okay, so and Dr. Bain does talk about this, that a lot of the previous research was just static stretching alone. In practicality, most people are not just going to do static stretching and then go run a marathon. They're going to be doing some dynamic stretching usually as well. So yes, you can include static stretching, but with the dynamic stretching as well, and that can be okay to optimize performance. Now, if you're doing any intense static stretching, maybe reserve that for the cool down, especially in those strength and power athletes. So you don't need to do your heavy, intense static stretching and deep stretches in the warm up. Save that for the cool down. You can just work on some muscle groups that you feel might be tight, especially if you're sitting before your exercise session for a few hours. You might want to do a little bit of hip flexor stretching, some glute stretches, and just getting those muscles a little bit lengthened before you go into your exercise session. Again, maybe 30 seconds per muscle group, and that's it. And you might just do one set of each, and that might be enough for you. Even me personally, I sometimes do some static stretches before I work out, coupled with my dynamic stretches as well. But I just feel like, oh, my hips are really tight today. I'm just going to stretch them out a little bit. And then, you know, maybe some glutes and some hamstrings if I need to a little bit. And then go into my dynamic, just because you sometimes just feel really tight in some areas and you want to just do a little bit of stretching before. So yes, you can do it. It's and again, not by itself. Okay, so that's where the difference is here. You don't want to just do static stretching and then go ahead and do some heavy squats. Not a good idea. So again, looking here at dynamic versus static warm-ups. Again, thinking of, okay, well, can I do static stretching? Should I not do static stretching in my warm-up? Again, you might see some mixed research on that. And again, this is where Dr. Bain kind of summarizes all the literature. So we see, you know, static stretching is inferior to dynamic stretching when we prepare for high power output activities. Okay, so it's been shown for that. Again, are you going to do static stretching alone? Probably not. Okay. Also, if you were to do dynamic stretching, is a static stretching going to counteract all the benefits you just got from your dynamic stretching? The answer is no. There's not really much evidence to show that it's going to just counteract everything you did with your dynamic stretches. Okay. Understanding as well, to kind of summarize everything, is that everyone is different. Everyone's going to have different preferences. Everyone has different things that work for them. Our bodies are all a little different, right? You know, might be tighter in some areas than someone else. You might have an injury somewhere, right? So it really depends. Everyone's going to be different. Now, another question that you might have is, well, can I do my static stretching before my dynamic, after my dynamic stretches? When can I do them? So let's take a look at what Dr. Boehm says. Well, it's a good question, because I've had students in even yesterday's class, in some of the sports they actually do some static stretching at the end, but they're very, very short, not for a long time. And at the end of the day, do you notice any decrease in your performance? Are you feeling like you're at a higher risk for injury, or you're more risk for injury? If the answer is no, then you're okay. Then it works for you. But some people, you know, the thing is with a warm up is that we're trying to build up intensity, right? And so by doing static stretching at the end, you're kind of decreasing the intensity a little. Your heart rate's going to go down. You're going to maybe start to cool down a bit. So you might want to put them closer to the beginning, before you do your dynamic stretches. So probably after the aerobic component, before you get into that. So you could do some foam rolling and then some static stretching, or static stretching, foam rolling, dynamic. Again, not one way to do it, but there's, again, not a conclusive answer saying, nope, you have to do static then dynamic, or dynamic then static. But logically, if you're warming up, you might not want to do static at the end, especially as you're increasing intensity, getting ready to do your specific sport. Okay, so if we are going to do a full body warm-up routine, here's kind of what you should do. You should have that initial aerobic component, as we talked about, that general warm-up, 5 to 10 minutes, jogging, walking, cycling, skipping, whatever you're going to do. Then after that, you'll do your static and dynamic stretching. So you can do your static first if you like, or if you want to do dynamic first, again, not wrong, okay? And if it works for you, great, okay? Then after that, you're going to go into your active and dynamic sport specific activities. So you're going to go specific as what you're going to do in your activity or sport. So whether you're working out at the gym, you might be doing some banded movements, you might be doing some lighter weights of, you know, the resistance exercises you're going to do to warm up, and get, you know, into those movement patterns, okay? And you probably should not be doing static stretching here, because now we're getting into, let's say, doing squats or deadlifts and with lighter weight. Why are you going to put your static stretching here? I personally wouldn't, okay? Hey, if it works for you, go ahead. But again, the intensity is higher at this point. The static stretching is going to kind of cool you down a bit, okay? Again, if you were to add the static stretching at the middle part here, again, after that aerobic warm-up, then we shouldn't see much of a performance impairment. Okay, and we'll probably see a decrease in injury risk, and that's very important. And again, especially if you're stressed, if you're really tired, you will be putting yourself at a higher risk for injury. So it is important to include a thorough warm-up. And then as we get older, unfortunately, you're gonna need to warm up. Okay, and I'll tell you that even, you know, for exercising my whole life, I definitely need to warm up now, or everything does start to feel stiff, and then you're probably gonna put yourself at risk for injury at that point. Okay. So that's how you should lay it out. Now, if we're including static stretching, there's some important things to consider. So 5 minutes of aerobic activity, I think we hopefully get that by now, okay? Then static stretching, we should not exceed 60 seconds for each muscle, okay? So, you know, 30 seconds each side, one set will probably be enough if you're doing it in a warm-up. If you feel you might need a little more, okay, but don't exceed 60 seconds. Okay, so that's important, because that's where we start seeing a decrease in performance. If you did see the TED Talk, please watch it. At 90 seconds, we're going to see a significant decrease in performance and 90 second stretching. So do not stretch for too long. 30 seconds is probably the sweet spot. Once you're done your static stretching, 5 to 15 minutes of dynamic stretching, and then moving to those sport specific movements. So those general dynamic stretches to warm up the joints, and then we can get into the more sport specific movements. So that's how you kind of want to lay it out, okay, and how you want a warm up to progress. And again, we can go back to that ramp protocol, and this pretty much is the same thing, right? As we're starting with the aerobic component, and then, activate, we can put in our static stretching there, and then some of the dynamic stretchings, and then mobilize into more of those, getting more specific stretches, and then potentiate into the higher intensity sport specific movements. So again, everything is the same, you just lay it out differently, right? And you can put it as ramp if you wanted to lay it out that way, or if in your head you remember, okay, aerobic first, then my foam rolling and static, then dynamic, then sport specific. Like that's pretty much how you would want to lay it out. And intensity is gradually increasing, okay? And again, don't use greater than 60 seconds static stretching. Also within 5 minutes of an activity without subsequent dynamic activity. Because again, that static stretching, it's going to start bringing the heart rate down. Your body temperature might start going down. So you ideally, you're not ending off your warm up with some static stretching, okay? Unless you're doing dynamic right after, that's fine. But you're not going to go into a soccer game and do some static stretching 5 minutes before, okay? And I think that makes sense. And I'm sure most of you who've done sports before or exercise, you're probably not doing static stretching right before you're going into a game. And I mean, if you have and you haven't gotten hurt, good. But again, the idea is the intensity is increasing as we go along, okay? Any comments or thoughts or questions on that? I hope that makes sense, because this is important, as you will have to create a warm-up as part of assignment, and you understand kind of the order of doing everything. Any comments or questions? No one? Makes sense? Good. You might have a test question on this too, I'm just saying. Okay, so again, really important, there is that TED Talk posted. Please watch that TED Talk. I know it's like 15 minutes, but really great information. So instead of watching your show on Netflix, put on YouTube, watch the video. Really, Dr. Boehm is also great at speaking. So watch it, and I hope you do enjoy the TED Talk. So here's kind of your to-do list is watch the TED Talk, post your response in the discussion post. What are your thoughts? What's kind of the summary? You might have the same thoughts as I do. You might kind of have some other ideas based on your experience. Feel free to kind of add in some of your experience. And then next week, we will go into the lecture on exercise technique and biomechanics. So just very fundamental concepts regarding resistance training. Okay, and then you have your lab quiz as well as a reminder, due by Sunday. Okay, so don't wait till the last minute. Don't wait till 11:50 on Sunday to do it. Please get it done as soon as possible. Thank you, Jordan, for advertising video. So next lab, good question. We are doing, the cardio equipment will be the upright bike, and we're gonna go through lower body dynamic stretches. Okay, so we're gonna go through a series of different stretches. We're gonna try them all out. And just to give you some ideas of some stretching you can include in someone's program. Before you are done, we do have a Kahoot. 10 questions, won't take long. Just a quick Kahoot to summarize what we learned today. So I will pull it up. Get your phones ready to log into your Kahoot. And let me pull it up for you. Oh, wait, I want to share the music. One sec. Okay, yeah, it should work. Because you got to do Kahoot with the music. So it's only 10 questions, and the Kahoot is posted for you as well on DC Connect. Dynamic. I like the mussel, broccoli, and fire. It's good. So I'll give you guys 1 more minute to join in. There's a lot more people on Zoom than on Kahoot right now, so. Thirty more seconds. Alrighty, so we're gonna get started. Again, if you didn't log in, you can just join along and just watch the game and answer in your head, up to you. So let's start it off. Only 10 questions, so it's not gonna take long. Good, easy one. That is false. You should cool down, some form of cool down, even if it's like 5 minutes of walking, you should cool down. Hope you like my joke. Good. Bone is not a soft tissue. Now that I look at that picture, it looks like it's the Jonas Brothers, but anyways. Good. You guys are listening. It was the Jonas Brothers, Jennifer, pretty sure. Good, specific, right? So we're preparing ourselves for the activity or sport. It is true. You can use static stretching. You're allowed. Pretty straightforward. I mean, that's not a tool for soft tissue work. Awesome. These are easy, so should all be getting perfect right now. This is a little bit of a trick one. Ish. Yeah. So yeah, most of them are like negligible, right? So may attenuate DOMS, it may increase flexibility, it may increase your range of motion, but again, it hasn't really proven to improve much performance. So don't worry, I'm not going to ask you such a trick question on a test like that. But again, it's not really the tool of SMR is not to increase performance. That's not what it's doing, right? So don't worry if you didn't get that one right, but it's a trick. General. Awesome. Good. Last question. True by itself is the key word. So yes, it will decrease performance if you're only doing static stretching before your sport or exercise. So with dynamic, it's okay, but not by itself. Rainbow, wherever rainbow is. DS. KD, yay. No clue who won. If anyone wants to claim their victory. Anyone? Who's the rainbow? Who's DS? Who's KD? Anyone? Craft dinner. Okay, that's you, David. Oh, Dylan. Awesome. Oh, good job, Katie. Okay, so it's not actual craft dinner. Okay. And rainbow. Pablo, that's you. Awesome. Good job, everyone. So again, just to review the content, that was the idea. And hopefully that was a good summary of what we talked about today. So that's it from my end today. Okay. So don't forget to do the quiz if you haven't done it yet. Okay. It's due Sunday. So please make sure to do the quiz. And if you have any questions, let me know. And then also feel free to just type your thoughts in the discussion post. Again, it's not worth marks, but it's kind of nice to just have that conversation and let's hear your thoughts based on your experience. Okay. Enjoy your weekend and I will see you in lab next week. I think, oh, some of you I don't have in lab, but you'll see Manny or you'll just see me again next Friday in lecture. So enjoy your weekend and go watch that TED Talk. Thanks, Jordan. Enjoy your weekend as well.